Can see it.
All right, verbal confirmation. All right, we have it. So let's get this started. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you. We have some of you in here on this webinar today from the DFW network. Some of you are from the Greater North Texas Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We might have some of our friends in China join. I don't know, it's really late for them. Some of you, like Kara, I met on Instagram, and I think that that's really cool that we could just bring all of these groups of people together. Okay. My goal here is to have this webinar last 50 minutes, and then I'll have some questions afterwards, okay? If you have any questions in the meantime, you can send those questions to the chat box. And if Karina is working, she will let me know that there's a question there, and I will attempt to address it, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. I have some books here. We Must Fail to Succeed is my publication from 2011, just before I went to China. And then also there's Make Today Your Day, which is my 2018 publication that was published when I was in China. And then there's my ebook, which is 31 Days Later. This is a book that you can get through in 5 minutes. I promise you, it goes real fast, okay? And 31 Days Later is available on my website, terrencethomas.com. Okay. And so you can go and download that book right now for free. Just put in your email and boom, you have it. Okay. terrencethomas.com. That is where you can get that. So once again, I just want to say that every single one of you, I appreciate you so much. And also, even though you cannot hear her, even though you cannot see her, my wife Karina is on this call, and she is working the logistics in the background. She's making things happen. She's making sure that this is nice and smooth. So thank you, Karina. Okay. So first of all, a lot of you have already heard my story. I grew up in Fort Worth, and I had one of those not so amazing childhood stories that a lot of people, they find themselves intrigued when I tell it. When I was a child, I grew up in Georgetown, which is north of Austin, near Waco, the Fort Hood area. And when I was younger, my mom started using drugs when I was a toddler. And at that time, I was in direct contact with my Mexican family. Okay. My father's from Mexico. He's from the northern part of Mexico, exactly where, I don't know. But when my mother started using drugs, the Mexican side of my family tried to get custody of me. I was 3 years old at the time, and my little brother was just born. And so my mother, she just fled to Fort Worth. And that's how my story in Fort Worth took place. All of my life, I have grown up without my father. And I guess to some degree, this has had a significant influence on who I am, the way that I perceive myself. There was an absence of a positive role model in my life. And as I discussed in my last webinar, during the height of the pandemic in 2020 in August, I found my father, my aunt, and my grandma and grandpa from Mexico all on Facebook. I found them after 34 years of my life going by and really not knowing these people. I found them on Facebook right in the middle of this pandemic. It was crazy. But what's even crazier than that is the fact that I reached out to them, and collectively they decided that they didn't want anything to do with me. And I say that because every single one of them ignored my messages, and every single one of them blocked me. And that was last year. So, with that being said, at least you all know that the information you're getting is very current and updated. But so I grew up without my father. He just wasn't there. And He continues to not be there, but that's perfectly fine because I'm going to be the best me and I'm going to live out my purpose in life and do what I'm meant to do with or without my father. My mother, she took me away from my father when I was 3, and she just started this downward spiral of drug use. My mother, when I was growing up, she would go to prison 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I cannot even tell you how many times she was in prison. And I just remember for most of my life, the communication that I did have with my mother were these letters and her poetry that she sent to me from prison. And recently, a seller went to she went to Amazon.com and she left a review for my book, and she was talking about the poetry, the poetic element of my life, the poetic element of who I am. It comes from my mother, because when I was a little boy growing up and she wasn't there because she was in prison, all I had were these poems that she was sending me from prison. And it wasn't until 2007 that I actually decided to stop throwing her poetry away and stop throwing my poetry away. And I started to keep it. And so at the end of this webinar, I'm going to share the first poem that I actually kept of my own, which led to me writing my first book, We Must Fail to Succeed. Life with my mother, it was a challenge because there were times when we were just in danger. I remember there was this one time where these 5 Deuce Crips, they came to our apartment to find my brother's father, my stepdad, and they were there to kill him. They tried to get into the apartment, but they failed, and they just took out a 9mm and shot at the door. There were 5 bullet holes in the door. 2 of those bullets penetrated the door. The other 3 did not, because that door was thick, probably 1.5 inches thick, and it was just like solid steel. But that was the type of life that I was living with my mother. On I-20 and I-35, there's this motel that you would never even see when you're driving by. It's called the Interstate Motel. And my mother and I, we lived there for a while because it was only $15 a night. This motel was just infested with drugs, crime. And there was this one morning when we woke up and I went outside and there was a guy in his car. There was a white guy who was in his car, murdered with his throat slit from ear to ear. And this was like a message that the local drug dealers were trying to send, because they left the car, the keys were in the car, his wallet was there, his money. They didn't steal anything from the guy. It was not a robbery at all. It was a murder, and it was just to prove a point. That happened right outside of my motel room. And it was just a really dangerous environment that I grew up in. My mother would take my brother and I out on the streets, panhandling. We would go to like a Walmart parking lot, and my mother would point at a vehicle, and I would just run up to that vehicle and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, I know you don't know me, but me and my mother and brother are stranded out here. We're trying to get something to eat. Can you help us?" And under the circumstances, a person really doesn't like have time to like take us somewhere to eat, and they want to be helpful. And so they would just give me $5 or $10. And after a night of doing this, we would have $500, $600, $700, $800. And my mom would just go and smoke it all up on drugs, use it, using crack, just smoke it all up, all that money. And so this was the reason why we were always behind on paying our rent. This is the reason that we were always getting kicked out of this motel and kicked out of that motel and on the streets again. I slept behind a convenience store on Seminary Drive and a pile of oil. There was glass everywhere, and I was just freezing back there, coughing because I got a cold from sleeping outside like that. I slept under a bridge before. You know, I've been on the streets, and a lot of that had to do with just life with my mother. When I went to Rosemont Middle School, which was on Seminary Drive in Fort Worth, and every day that I got off the school bus, I was walking toward the motel room, and I had this long walk down the stretch of street that's near I-20. And I remember how afraid I was every time I went home. I was so afraid that my palms were sweating and I was just shivering, trembling. My knees felt like they were jello. And as I got closer and closer to that motel room, my heart would start beating so hard. And the reason that I just had this fear that was so overwhelming was because I believed every time that I went home that I was going to come home to a motel room where my mother was going to be there and she was going to be murdered, and I was going to find her in that condition. Or I was going to arrive and my mother was going to be in tears because my brother had been kidnapped by local drug dealers. This is what I was terrified of every single day when I walked home from the bus stop where my school bus would drop me off. And that was a reality. I'm 35 years old right now, and I'm telling you right now, that is not an exaggeration. That is not just something that I came up with, an unreasonable nightmare or something, a child's imagination. That's not what it was. That was a real threat. That was the life that I lived every single day. When we were at the motel, I always had to look to the left, look to the right, because I knew that there was probably somebody that was going to grab me and throw me in the car because my mother owed them money. That was the reality that we lived in. I loved my mother. I love my mother so much. There was this one time when my mother sent me into a store to steal baby clothes. She sent me in to steal the baby clothes. I did as I was instructed. I stole the baby clothes and I got out of the store. The police were waiting for me. The police were waiting for me. They were waiting for my mother. They were waiting for my brother. And they put all of us in the backseat of a police car. And so once the processing happened, it was determined that my mother was going to go to prison. I was going to go to a homeless shelter for teenagers in Fort Worth called The Bridge, and my brother was going to go in foster care. And I remember the police put me in the back seat of the police car with handcuffs on. And I saw my mother go into another police car with handcuffs on, and they drove side by side going north on I-20. And then one of those police cars that had my mother in it, it just veered off to the right, and I would not see my mother again for 3 or 4 years. And I just saw that. And I was looking at her in the back seat as that police car drove away, and she was just crying, and I was crying too. But that was the reality that we lived in. So that was life with my mother. At this point, I am going to ask everybody to mute their microphones. I hear the wonderful chatter of family. Karina, do we have any people trying to get in?
Oh my gosh, it's Terrence.
Yes, it's Terrence. So once again, I'm going to ask everybody to mute their mics. All right. So that was life with my mother. It was challenging. It was definitely challenging. So today we're talking about freedom and forgiveness. And this is something that is something that I'm really passionate about, because forgiveness is something that I really had problems with my whole life. There were people that hurt me, who really, really hurt me. And I just held that pain inside of me for so long. But the person that hurt me the most, that I'm going to focus on today, was my mother. And the reason that I'm going to focus on her is because every single one of us, we all have parents. And whenever the world turns their back on you, whenever the world lies and cheats you, whenever the world tells you that you're nobody and you just have no value and the world rejects you, you at least expect your mother to be there. I feel like that is something that we can all agree on. You expect your mother to be there to back you up when the rest of the world turns their back. And there were just too many circumstances where my mother did not do that for me. And so that's why for today's webinar, I'm going to focus on my mother. Right now, I'm going to read to you all from page 80 of my book. And the title of this chapter is called He Who Forgives is Free. The pain of my past, no, the pain of the past is a poison that consumes and kills you slowly. It sits inside and festers, consuming you daily, little by little. It ruins the relationships you now have and makes you feel like you can't trust people. At least that's what happened to me after the lies and broken promises from my mother. And so I'm going to ask you all a question, okay? I'm going to stop my share here so that I can see everybody. Okay? And the question is, what is the pain of the past? How does it possibly influence you today? That is a question that I'm asking all of you. If you want to answer, turn off your mic. No, turn on your mic and go ahead and answer. What is the pain of the past? How does it influence you today? No right or wrong answers, no stupid answers, okay? I encourage you to give it a try, anybody. Okay, I'm going to type it. What is the pain? Oh, okay. So Karina has an idea. The idea is if you don't want to verbally say it, you can just type it in the chat. What is the pain of the past? How does that influence you today? So you can speak or type it, anybody.
I have an experience that definitely changed who I am today. And it was bitter. It turned out to be bittersweet. And I don't want to go into the whole story, but in the town that I lived in and my kids were raised in, and I gave my heart and my life in the community. I had a real experience of blatant racism from town people, and a consequence of that, we left that town. We basically had to just start over in a new place because the pressure just got so bad. Started, kind of like a new career, and it took me a long time to get over the hurt. It was just, there was anger, but it was just so much hurt. And it's taken me maybe 10, 15 years to realize that I was actually traumatized by that. I didn't realize that I was. And I started getting involved again with my Hispanic community, getting back to where my roots had always been. And I've really found the healing, beginning once I got back to where I had always been. It's kind of general to say all that, but it took a lot of just inner reflection to figure out that I really did have a lot of bitterness, and that I had to forgive a lot of those people that I didn't even know. It was just like this unknown people. They were always, oh, they decided, and those people, and I didn't even know where the attacks were coming from. But it was real. It came down to a lot of hurt. But anyway, I do credit God in my life and my faith and my family and people that were close to me to bring me to the place that I am today. I'm very grateful to meet people like you and the people that are around me right now. I'm stronger than ever. I feel like I'm able to now not fear the things that I used to fear. It's like what can I lose? I've lost before, and here I am. I made it, you know. So my 2 cents.
All right then. Well, I appreciate that. Okay, so we had Gilberto and Julia also answer the question. Okay. We also had input from Karina. The pain of the past can make people bitter, and that results in them not being able to see their blessings. Gilberto says closes opportunity. Julia says pushes you back from taking advantage of your blessings and opportunities. Okay, that's good. Karina, can you message Vibrant Christian Network? Just tell her log in again. Okay, so I'm going to go to page 81 in my book now. Page 81. That's item number 3. Okay, so I've come to realize that it's easy to hold a grudge and administer pain when I have had so much pain exerted on me. It's a natural reaction to want to hurt someone back when they've hurt us. I know that my mother loves me, and I know that due to her addiction, she's hurt me many times in my life. I've almost had to let her go completely because I had to protect myself from her. In 2005, she was on her way to my graduation from Georgetown, Texas. She was almost to Fort Worth. And I was so enthusiastic about my mother being in my graduation, especially since I really did not think that I would ever even make it out of high school. My plan was to be a high school dropout. Time just passed, and I walked across the stage and I received my high school diploma without my mother even being present. So, quite naturally, I investigated why she had not made my graduation. And sources told me that the reason that she was not there was because she was caught up in a drug deal on her way to Fort Worth. At that point, I was fed up. I told myself that I was done with people who are unreliable. I told myself that I was done with her. A deep animosity developed inside of me because of my mother and her lifestyle. I was hurt far beyond my comprehension. I did not even know that that kind of pain could possibly happen. And so, what I learned from that experience was that my mother, she was unreliable. I learned that my mother just could not be trusted. In 2005, when I graduated from high school, Manish was graduating from UTA. I was graduating from high school. In 2005, I just put my hands in the air and I said, you know what? That's it. I'm done. I don't want anything else to do with my mother the rest of my life. And that's where I was. So I am now going to read for you from page 81. In 2009, my mother passed out on a parking lot somewhere in Round Rock, Texas. She was out panhandling and asking for money, and her body decided that it was going to quit. The ambulance transported my mother to the St. Davis Round Rock Medical Center, where it was discovered that more than half of her blood was not present within her circulatory system. She had not seen any bleeding, but the blood, for some reason, was not in her body. The doctors came to the conclusion that she had internal bleeding. That's when I got a phone call around 5 a.m. from a family friend telling me that my mother was on her deathbed. So I thought about the situation. I thought about how I said a few years earlier that I was completely done with her because she couldn't come to my graduation because of a drug deal. I thought about that. And I just realized that she hurt me so much in the past and that I really wanted to cut her off. But I could not deal with the whole process of burning every bridge. And I did not want to see myself associated with her when she was ripping off, lying, and cheating, and getting over on people and looking for more people to lie and cheat and get over on. And so even though she was on her deathbed, I just decided that I still didn't want anything to do with her. Luckily for my mom, she survived that event. She didn't die. She almost died. She was able to get a blood transfusion. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And she survived that. And once she survived that, I think that my eyes started to open up as to, what was going on and what was going to happen in terms of lost time with my mother. Okay, so here we go, page 82. Page 82. Somewhere along the line, I started to understand that my mom was my biggest influence. She's the one that taught me not to give up when a person says no. She's the one that taught me persistence in all weather conditions, even when the police were coming. You don't have to get up. You don't have to give up until you've asked every possible person. That's one of the things that my mom taught me. That was a lesson that I got from her. And I began to understand that my mom was a key element of my developmental process. And I could not embrace who I was in life until I first embraced my mother. So I found it in myself to later on forgive my mom and start a new life with her, a new relationship. I would not be naive and I would not forget about all that had happened in the past, but I would treat her as if she did no wrong. It was another chance for me to rebuild a relationship with my mother from scratch. It was the chance that we both needed. And so she ended up in the hospital again. And I decided to go to Round Rock to see my mother in the hospital. Something inside me almost felt like it was not okay to show up. After all, I went through cancer and my mother didn't even show up for my radiation treatments. My mother didn't show up for my CAT scans. My mother didn't even show up to the hospital when I was in the hospital. But regardless of how much pain I had suffered from being betrayed by her, I knew that my face was the one face that she expected to see when the rest of the world turned their back on her. I knew that my presence gave me the opportunity to show my mother love in a way that I felt like she had never shown me. I also realized that in order for me to be there for my mother, I had to forgive my mother. And so if you look at number 2 right here, you can see that friends and family need you now. And the question is, can you be there for them? Can you be there for somebody who you are holding a serious grudge against? Can you be there for somebody that you have resentment in your heart for? Can you be there for somebody who the idea of seeing them around, the idea of having them in your presence, it just pisses you off? Can you be there for that person? And the answer is no, you can't. You can't. And so, what's next? You need to find it in your heart to forgive them. I had to find it in my heart to forgive my mother. That was the only way that I could go and visit my mother in that hospital. When I went in that hospital and I saw her on that bed, some part of me just wanted to just lash out at her. Some part of me just wanted to just tell her everything that she had done wrong. Some part of me wanted to just mention the $1,000 credit card that my mother took from me. And when I was 18 years old, and caused me to have bad credit at the age of 18, which put me behind. Because when I was in my early 20s, there was so much I could not do because I already had bad credit. And that was all because of my mom, who took my credit card, spent all the money, lied and said she was going to pay me back, never paid me back. When I saw her in the hospital bed, that's what I wanted to tell her so bad. I wanted to talk to her about not being there when I was a child and just getting locked up in prison over and over again. I just wanted to tell her, Mom, you always said that you loved me, but you know what? If you really loved me, why could you not be free for me? Why could you not stay out of prison for me? Why could you not be there when I graduated? Why could you not be there when I was sick in a hospital? I went through having cancer without you, but you were too busy out there on the streets chasing drugs to be there for me. That's what I wanted to tell her when I saw her in the bed in the hospital, but I did it because I forgave her. And I tried my best to just give her a clean slate. I said, well, how are you doing today, Mom? How are you doing? How do you feel today? That's what I said, because I forgave her. And so I have a question for you all. No right or wrong answers, no stupid answers either. Okay. You can answer in the chat box or you can answer verbally. When you forgive somebody, who is it for? That's the question. When you forgive somebody, who is it for? That's the question. Verbal answers, chat box. Let's go. I'm looking for some community engagement. Okay, Julia says it's for yourself. Okay, excellent answer, Julia. Acela says it's for yourself. Okay. Juanita says it's for Juanita and her family. Oh, I like that answer. I like that answer. Okay. Anybody else want to answer that question? When you forgive somebody, who is it for? When you forgive somebody, who is it for? Okay. So those are all fantastic answers. Let's go back to Gilberto says it's for ourselves. Excellent answer, Gilberto. All right then. So if you look at the Bible, right, the Bible talks extensively about how we as humans, we are imperfect creatures. We as humans, we have problems. It goes back to Adam and Eve, the very beginning. Okay. There is no human being that is perfect except for Jesus Christ. Every single one of us are born into sin. And this is why when you have a child, you don't teach the child to lie or steal the cookies, but for some reason the child is in the kitchen stealing the cookies. And then when you say, what are you doing? Nothing. The child is lying. It's because we're born into sin. Okay, we are an imperfect creature. And God has mercy on us. God has a mercy that we can't even understand. Because as an imperfect creature, we are forgiven. God forgives us. God forgives us. Everything that you've ever done in your life, everything that you are ashamed of, that is forgiven. Everything that you wish did not happen because it creates a sense of shame and embarrassment in your life, it's forgiven. Everything is forgiven. The greatest blessing is that God still loves you regardless of your faults. God still loves you regardless of the things that you are ashamed and embarrassed of. God still loves you. Humanity may not love you, but God still loves you. And the reason that God still loves you is because you are forgiven. The Bible also goes on to say that the same forgiveness and mercy that God has extended to each one of us is the same forgiveness and mercy that we should extend to others. Because the reality of the situation, just as you are an imperfect person, just as I am an imperfect person, all of the people who have hurt you are also imperfect, flawed creatures. All of us. And so the next question is this: what does it mean to forgive but not forget? What does it mean to forgive but not forget? You can answer verbally or you can answer in the chat box over here on the right-hand side. What does it mean to forgive but not forget? What does it mean to forgive but not forget? Oh, do we have any answers for $1 million? What does it mean to forgive but not forget? Anybody? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm moving on. Forgiving but not forgetting simply means that you can be in the presence of that person that you have forgiven and you don't feel upset. You don't feel angry. You don't feel frustrated. You don't feel disdain. You don't feel animosity. You don't feel the desire to get vengeance and revenge. You don't feel all of those things. You could be in that person's presence and you're perfectly fine because you've forgiven them. But you know that that is a very shady, sneaky individual who is capable of lying to you again. You know that that person is capable of breaking promises again. You know that that person is capable of hurting you again. You know that that person is capable of crushing your heart again. And because of this, you choose not to engage that person in certain ways. That's what that means. To forgive but not forget. It means that you're not going to be emotionally attached to that person in such a way that they're able to just bring so much harm to you emotionally and mentally and psychologically. But you're not going to just make the same mistakes that you made in the past with that person. If that person is a notorious liar and they're like, oh, yeah, I'll be there at 6, and you forgive, but you don't forget, you'll be like, okay, cool. And you'll just proceed as if that person's not going to be there because you know well that they probably lied and they're not going to be there at 6. And so when they don't show up at 6, no problem, because that's just something that you expected out of them. You did not forget. That's what it means to forgive and not forget. And so now, page 82 of my book. Often, forgiveness is not for the person that did the harm. Forgiveness is for the forgiver who wants to release the pain associated with the wrong that was done to them. I have come to understand that God forgives even the most nefarious of people. God forgives even the most flagrant of sins. I'm fully aware that the sin that I have brought to the earth, along with the hurt that came with my sin, I'm aware of it. I understand that God has forgiven me. So that's the same reason that I could have mercy for my mother. After all, I'm not any better in regard to God's perception of sin in my life. Dots connected in my head, and I realized that it was okay to forgive my mother. By forgiving her, I was able, to let go of the pain that she caused so many times in my life. I was able to let go of all the times that I got ripped off by my mother. I was able to let go of all of the lies and broken promises, the times that she took my money, all of the burden that I had just collected my entire life was suddenly lifted off of me. It was lifted away when I decided to forgive my mother. Forgiving my mother had a significant impact on me. The first was that I did not carry around the emotionally exhausting memories of antiquity. The second is that I did not feel betrayed any longer, and I was able to grow with my mother. The third was that I had captured so much time with my mother between 2009 and 2014 that was lost due to her being in prison in my childhood. From 2009 to 2014, those were just the most glorious years of my life that I had with my mother. And it was all because I chose to forgive her. Had I not forgiven her, that would not have been possible at all. So I'm going to page 83 to talk about our relationship status. That's something that people would ask about. Before my mother passed away, people say, well, you know what, after hearing all this about your mom, how are the two of you? Upon stumbling across my testimony, many people ask about my relationship with my mother up until her death. And I had a very loving relationship with her during the last years of her life. She called me on Skype at least 3 times a day to talk about nothing. And that was significant to me because I had all kinds of questions regarding my family. She was fully aware of everything that was going on in China, and she communicated with me well. I am blessed because I decided to forgive my mother. That was huge for me. There was so much lost time that my mother and I got back because I decided to forgive her. Now, I'm going to read about my mother's last day. I spent most of my childhood dreading the day that my mother would be murdered, and it never happened. However, my world would turn upside down just after Christmas 2014. Corinne and I were working at Web International in Taiyuan City. The hours were long, and I was in conflict with the administration of this company constantly. The so-called office hours kept us locked inside of our work building, even after all of our tasks and objectives were complete. Karina approached me and told me that I needed to get in contact with my family. A British friend named Tony apparently saw my family posting on my Facebook wall and notified Karina about the post. Facebook is blocked in China, so I was unaware of these communication efforts. I called back home from Skype from my office, and I found out that in December 2014, my mother passed away. This was all happening on a Monday, December 29th. I was told that my mother was having a Christmas dinner with family and friends the day before when she had suddenly stopped breathing and collapsed. She was taken to the hospital where she passed away. All I could do was be in shock. I exhausted myself for years, fearing something that never happened, which was the murder of my mother in the hotel room. My mother would be out playing bingo when I was a child, and I would be at home having these vivid nightmares about drug dealers trying to kill her when I was a child. All of those years of fear turned out to be a waste of time in the end because my mother died at a Christmas party in 2014. I will miss my mother forever. And so, a question that I have for each of you: are you going to free yourself from the pain of the past? Are you going to take forgiveness into consideration today so that perhaps you can start building a loving relationship with a family member or a loved one? Is that something that you're willing to do today? Think about someone in your life that you have not forgiven. Think about the discomfort and the awkwardness that arises when this individual comes around. Decide today that you are going to free yourself from the pain that these people have caused you. Make that decision today. They are obviously powerful to you, or they would not have the ability to intensely change your mood the way that you have allowed them to. I love the way that Lewis B. Smedes expresses it. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and to discover that the prisoner all this time was you. So free yourself and free your heart from these people. Forgive them in person. Make a phone call. Do whatever you have to do to get in contact with them so that you can forgive them. Let them know that you are being authentic with your forgiveness. It's important to establish limits. The stupid neither forgive nor forget. The naive forgive and forget, but the wise forgive and never forget. When I decided to allow my mother back in my life, I understood that I had to establish limits with her. I would not send her money on short notice or drop what I'm doing in life to aid her in some random escapade she spontaneously decided to take part in. I established the fact that I would not aid her in her never-ending quest for drugs and impulsive behavior. She understood that I was no longer going to allow her to have access to everyone in my life. Since she was a con artist and knew how to employ my relationships to get what she wanted from people, I made sure that she understood that these are the way things were going to be, no matter how much she despised it. She also had to accept the fact that I had broken away from the cycle in which we lived when I was growing up. And I had taken into consideration new ideas and new ways of life and new culture and new ways of just making my own life happen and new ways of accomplishing my goals and new procedures. She had to accept that. I was not going to live my life the way that we lived life when I was growing up. I can no longer do what she did. And that was a part of establishing a new relationship and forgiving her. You may want to limit how much time you give the forgiving loved ones per week. You decide to limit how much information you want to give them access to. You may have to block some folks from Facebook. You just have to make the rules that you are comfortable with and make sure that they fully understand. And you know what? There's one more sentence that I didn't write in the book here, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you all live. You have to enforce these new rules. You make the rules that you're comfortable with and you enforce them. I had to do that with my mother. Taking these steps will help with the process of forgiving people, and it will make relationship reconstruction a habit and possible, while we simultaneously are circumspect. In order to get this done, we have to make our blueprint for success and then employ the correct tools in a timely manner to get the job done with solid results. Forgiving somebody, it's not easy, but you have to make a plan as to how you're going to engage that person after you forgive them. You have to make a plan and you have to enforce it. So now I'm going to share a poem with you. It's called I Feel No Defeat. I wrote it in 2007, February 23rd, 2007. This was the first poem that I wrote, and I kept it because I used to always take my poetry and trash it. I thought all my poetry was trash. The fact that I was trashing my poetry, this is also, it's a signal. It shows how I thought of myself at that time. I had no value for my work. I had no value for my creativity, and I had very little value for myself at that time. But this poem, I kept it, and it goes like this. I feel no defeat. There is victory in my soul. There is the flame of a winner, and it consumes me whole. I will pace like a champion, all circumstances overcome. I am not defeated by my past, but I'm proud of where I'm from. And with a heart of gold, I will pursue my dreams. I know that I cannot do it alone, so I work on a team. And it is Christ who's my partner. There's nothing impossible with his power, but it is through him that I shall live a fulfilling life every day and every hour. That's my poem. I feel no defeat. I wrote that in 2007. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to show you all some photos. Thank you, Karina. Let's see. Okay, I see Sella had to go somewhere. That's cool. Here we go, share screen, and go back to this PowerPoint here. Share that, all right. So let's make that big. What you have here, these are some family pictures here. First of all, I just would like to show you all my mother. On the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, that's my mother. If you look at my face, you can see that I clearly am a copy of her, okay? Everything about my cheeks, my jaw, my nose, it comes from my mother. Uh, on the right-hand side here in the white, that's my brother. My brother died in 2019 in a tragic car accident in Austin, Texas, while unfortunately running from the Austin Police Department. Uh, he's wearing a white uniform there. This is when he was in prison in Abilene, Texas. And on the left-hand side, those are his two beautiful daughters. They're a little older now, and they're two incredibly smart girls. They have like straight A's. I'm proud of them. These are two pictures of my mom. On the left-hand side, Georgetown, Texas. On the right-hand side, that's my mom in Fort Worth. And on the left-hand side here, that's my brother with his baby boy. This was actually in 2019. All right, then. So I think that I got muted for a second there. So, everybody, I'm so glad to have you today. We're a little bit over. Now, I would like to open for questions. So does anybody have questions now? So if you have questions, let me see. I'm going to turn on my chat here. All right, then. If you have questions, just turn on your mic and just go ahead and ask away.
My question would be, how was the process of forgiving your mom? Because I know forgiveness is a very hard, and the fact that you talk about how you forgive her, that process or that thought process that went through your head before, saying, I'm going to forgive her. How was that for you in the sense of, before seeing her? Was it just an instant change, or was it something that you had thought about, for months, weeks, days prior to, or it was just instant for you?
I would say that that was something that I thought about for months. I had to figure out how to re-engage my mother. Before 2009, when I decided to forgive her, my mother would always call my phone. And, like I would pick up the phone and she would just say, like, hey, how are you doing? What are you doing? What's your plans today? Like she was always calling me, with all this small talk just to see how I was doing because she was actually interested in my life. And I would hang up on her all the time. I couldn't even stand the sound of her voice. It irritated me so much. And so I just knew that who I am as a person was heavily influenced by her. And I knew that there's like this power and this destiny inside of me that I would never access unless I was able to embrace the things that my mother taught me. And so I started the process of just taking her phone calls and talking to her for a minute, and then increasing the time that I talked to her a little bit while simultaneously making sure that I kept those boundaries active. I enforced these new rules because I knew that my mother was dangerous in some ways. She's a con artist. And so it took time. It was not easy. So, Julia, did I answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Okay, are there any other questions?
I have another question. What inspired you to want to write a book, or, your books in regards to forgiveness for your mom?
Okay, well, that poem that I shared with you, I Feel No Defeat. That was a poem that I wrote in 2007, and I had this little journal that was a birthday gift. And I started putting more and more poetry into the book, into the journal. And what I started to realize was that the journal was like full of life lessons. And so my first book, We Must Fail to Succeed, actually is the result of a lot of these poems that I was writing in that journal. And I decided to just go ahead and, put my head down, get to work. And I wrote my first book in 28 days in a Subway sandwich shop. I would go there every day and, just put in 2 to 3 hours of hard work. And I got that book done in 28 days. And I was really proud that, I was able to achieve that. But it was just a matter of converting poetry into a book of wisdom and self-help. Okay, are there any more questions? All right then, so I'm just gonna call everybody by name to get their attention. Kara, Sandy, Juanita. Anybody else? Is that Deborah, Vibrant Christian? I'm not sure. Are there any more questions, anybody? Okay, everybody. Well, I just want to say that I appreciate you all for joining this webinar. It means the world to me that you all could be here. I appreciate that so much. Okay. If you haven't been to my website to get my free ebook, terrencethomas.com, go download it today. You just slip your email in and it'll be sent directly to your email box in PDF format. Thank you all. Okay. Be blessed. I'll have another webinar next month. Bye.